Hey, what's up? It's Jared with State of Tech, and today we're going to talk about the top 5 camera settings for your Galaxy S8 or S8 Plus that are going to help you get better photos. Now, I run a channel on photography called Ditch Auto besides this channel, and it's all about photography, mostly with like DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras, but there's a lot of stuff that can be learned about photography over at that channel, so I would say check it out. And some of the things I'm going to be talking about in this video are going to be things that I definitely talk about a lot over there, and I have a course on photography that's free, and I'll link that in the description below. It's definitely a course that you can take and apply to smartphone photography. So anyways, let's get into these top 5 camera tips. So your S8 or S8 Plus has a pretty decent camera in it. I mean, I'm sure when you are taking pictures, you've captured some great photos, but at times it's struggle. You have situations where the camera just doesn't get it right. You hit that shutter button and the photo just doesn't really work out. Well, that's because you're probably shooting in automatic mode. This is going to be the first tip, is to actually use Pro mode in the camera. And if you've seen Pro mode and maybe even tried it once, there's a little bit of a learning curve there. But once you get it figured out, you can definitely help tell the camera what it is that you want the camera to do, rather than letting the camera do all of its math and technology stuff, which may or may not work out for you when you're trying to get the photo that you're hoping to get. So to get to Pro mode, when you have your camera opened, you're going to swipe over to the right, and you will see the options. You're in automatic mode by default. Tap on Pro, and the camera will open up in Pro mode. You have the ability to adjust the shutter speed of your camera and the ISO of your camera, which is the sensor sensitivity. So the shutter speed is how long the shutter or the sensor is exposed to light, so the shutter stays open a certain amount of time, which there is no physical shutter on this camera, so shutter speed is really, this is all happening digitally, but how long is the sensor actually being available to light? The longer that the sensor is available to light, the more light that's coming in and the brighter your image can be. The faster that process is of opening and closing or exposing to light, the less light that's going to be coming in and hitting that sensor. And there's different things that happen there as well. With the ISO, that's the sensor sensitivity. So the sensor itself, how sensitive is that to light? Think about it like this. When you go from a dark room out into a bright room, like your eyes are really sensitive, and sometimes you may even see spots and your eyes just aren't working as well because of they're having to work harder. But when your eyes are adjusted, they don't have to work nearly as hard. And with ISO, the lower the number, the less hard the sensor has to work. The higher the number, the harder it has to work. And these sensors on these smartphone cameras, though they're getting really good, are not really that great when you make them work too hard. So if you're going to go and adjust your ISO and you go too far above 200, you're going to start to see some noise in that image. If you've ever taken a photo with your smartphone, maybe in a darker room, and that photo just looks really grainy, you see that color noise all over the photo, that's the ISO being way too high and the sensor is working harder than it really has the capability to do. Now on this camera you can go all the way up to 800, which there are instances where 800 would work and be okay. It's definitely better than missing the shot altogether, but it's gonna produce a more noisy image. So I always recommend trying to keep the ISO as low as you can and only increase it when absolutely possible or when absolutely necessary. So with the shutter speed is represented as kind of a fraction you see here until you get down below, I think it's 1/4, it goes to 0.3. So this is represented as a measurement of time. How long is that sensor exposed to light? And the if you go down to like 1/2000, 1/6000, and this goes all the way up to 1/24,000, that's really fast. It's just really quickly taking the image. And what's good about that, about a fast shutter speed, is that it freezes the action. So if you're shooting sports or fast moving things, or you're following action or something, using a faster shutter speed like that is definitely going to be better. In lower light situations, when you need more light coming into your camera so that you can expose the shot properly, you're going to need to slide that slider up and get more towards maybe 1/60th of a second, or maybe even down to 1/20th of a second. But what that's doing is it's leaving the shutter open longer, and that also allows movement to happen while it's opened, and that's what creates motion blur. So you want to be careful there. This is kind of a dance that you play between whatever is happening with your action and the settings that you're able to use with the camera. And it's going to take practice to really master this to the point where you can go into pro mode and just slide your settings to where you want them, and you're going to capture a great image. This is the one tip that's actually going to take a little bit of practice. But pro mode definitely is the best way to get fantastic images out of your camera. And this was a really quick look at pro mode, but in pro mode, in the course that I teach on manual photography, we talk more about shutter speed and ISO and whatnot. And so if you want to look at that course, or even if you want to look at some of the other videos that we have over at Ditch Auto, it will better explain this stuff. So the next tip is actually using manual focus. Now, you also have to be in pro mode in order to use manual focus. Typically, autofocus is nice because we just point our phone at someone and hit the shutter button, and most of the time that person ends up being the subject in focus, or that object, or whatever it is we're taking photos of. But there are instances when you're trying to get a photo of something, maybe, like a little bird lands or something, and you're pointing your camera at it, and it seems to be focusing on a flower in the background, or there's always a situation where we're tapping around on our screen trying to get the focus in the right position, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, and we miss the opportunity. Well, when you're in pro mode, the option directly above, right above the shutter speed is, it says AF, and AF is autofocus. It's right above standard, and so AF is your autofocus, but you also have the ability to slide and adjust your manual focus. And it's fantastic to be able to do this, because if you don't want your focus to move, maybe you have your shot and you're just waiting for an opportunity. And how many times does this happen? When you're waiting for that shot to happen, you hit the shutter speed and it doesn't get focus. It focuses on something else by accident. If you are in manual focus and you are ready and waiting and holding your phone nice and still so you don't change the focal plane on accident, manual focus could be a great option for taking pictures and getting the subject or the object or whatever it is in focus every single time. So definitely a cool tip. Yet another thing that's going to take a little bit of practice, but nonetheless a fantastic option to have on the camera. So the next is going to be white balance, and white balance is important because a lot of times we're taking photos and sharing them from our phone without really doing too much to them. So the white balance, if we set that to auto, we're telling the camera, go ahead and choose a good color range for my image. And sometimes this phone does it well, sometimes it totally ruins it. How many times have you taken a picture of the sky and there was a blue sky there, but it wasn't that blue? Or you're taking pictures of a landscape and there's some trees, they look very nice, it's fall time, they look very nice and yellow, bright, vibrant colors, but everything ends up kind of being blue looking in the image. A lot of times it is challenging for the camera to get the proper white balance. So you can actually tap on WB for white balance and you can make changes there. You have different options. So you have auto, obviously. You have Kelvin, which actually allows you to slide anywhere between 10,000 and all the way down to 2,300. 2,300 being cool, you're introducing a lot of blue to your image, and 10,000 being extremely hot, we're introducing a lot of orange to your image. So you can actually fine-tune that in and just use this slider and see what looks good through the screen of your phone, and what you see is what you're going to get in this instance. Whereas with auto white balance, you may see something, take the photo, and end up getting something else. You also have a couple of other options here. You have fluorescent lighting, which is 4000K. You have incandescent lighting, and so these are matched for different types of lighting that you might have inside of a building. So you can choose from those options. You also have cloudy, which is 6500K, and then you have daylight, which is 5500K. So these are more just like presets. You can definitely use the Kelvin slider and slide that to 5400K, and it would be the exact same as, you know, choosing daylight. So this is yet another good option. A lot of times I will still end up using auto white balance because I don't want to have to really think about too many settings at once with my smartphone. But when I have a shot that I want to get, I don't have a big nice camera on me and I want to use my phone, I definitely want to go in and use as many of these settings as I can to get the best image possible. So the next thing is metering mode. Metering mode is telling your camera where to choose the exposure, from. And metering mode is pretty important because spot metering means that it is actually looking throughout the entire image and kind of helping you understand where your exposure is there. You have different metering options. You have spot metering, you have center weighted, and you have matrix. So these are three different ways of your camera looking at the environment and deciding what it is going to give you a exposure reading on. Now, at the top of the right side of the screen, there is your exposure compensation that it is telling you whether you are plus or minus on your exposure. This helps you dial in your exposure, and this is a great tool for understanding if you are within a good ballpark for your shutter speed and your ISO, which we talked about in the first tip. Using that exposure compensation over there at the top, you can see, like right now, I'm overexposed quite a bit. So I would want to slide my my exposure down a little bit, or I could even decrease a little bit of my ISO to get that number closer to maybe 1.0 or even 0. Because 0 would be an even exposure, but sometimes with my phone I like to go maybe plus 0.7, just a little bit, give it a little bit of extra light so that those dark areas in the image aren't completely gone. The way that this exposure reading is given to you is different based on the type of metering mode that you are on. And so spot metering is, definitely looking more at overall the overall image. You have your center weighted, which is actually looking more towards the middle of the image, which would be great if you're trying to take a portrait and you want to do expose for the person. You could do center weighted, and then matrix is more of a dynamic option. When you are looking to get your exposure, matrix works a little bit different. I typically don't use matrix. I typically end up using spot metering most of the time. But like I said, if I am doing a portrait or something like that, and I really want to know what my exposure is, center weighted is where I end up going, and that helps me understand that a little bit better, because we have our eye and we can see, and the only really way to know that we're going to get a good exposure is by taking a photo and looking at the photo and making adjustments. That's all very time consuming. So using spot metering definitely helps you better meter the light that the camera sees, and you're able to make those adjustments on the fly. And in controlled situations, that's much easier than when you are outside in situations where you've got sun coming in from an angle, you've got trees casting some shade, you've got a person who's probably not looking directly into the sun, and there's a lot of things going on. And so knowing a little bit about what your camera sees definitely helps. And I get a lot more into metering modes in my photography course, and I don't typically use too many of the metering modes on my S8, but they come in handy in certain situations, so I wanted to make you well aware of them. So tracking autofocus is also a cool option if you have kids and you are taking pictures of them and you're typically following them around with your phone trying to get a shot, and sometimes you take the photo and the autofocus is, you aren't able to get focus. And using manual focus in a situation like that would actually be pretty hard, because manual focus means that hopefully nothing is moving, because once you set the manual focus, if anything moves, it might not be in focus anymore. But autofocus sometimes is only as good as the last time that the camera decided to refocus. And typically the camera does an okay job at that, but tracking autofocus gives you an option to track moving subjects. It's more like a continuous autofocus than the regular autofocus on the phone, which is continuous, but not 100% of the time. Like, it will check focus and then maybe check focus and then check focus again, where tracking is actually tracking a subject through your scene, and that makes it definitely a lot easier to make sure that you're getting that shot. So you need to go into your actual camera settings for that, and then toggle on tracking autofocus, and right there it says focus on and track a subject selected on the previous screen. So you're actually going to select the subject, and then the camera is going to track that subject. So it's using a little bit of artificial intelligence there, I think, which is pretty cool. So tracking autofocus is a great option as well, and I was just kind of showing you how that works. So the last thing, a bonus tip I talked about earlier, shooting in camera raw. I shoot in JPEG plus RAW because those RAW files are much easier to edit. A JPEG image is a compressed image that is not very editable because it deletes all the extra data that it doesn't need to make a smaller, more easy to share image. A RAW file is a bigger file, but it contains all of the data that the camera was able to capture, and that means if your white balance was off, you took a photo and it was just way too blue and you wanted to warm it up a little bit, you're going to have the ability to warm that image up without making it look kind of fake. Some of those Instagram filters that you apply and it warms up an image, but it also makes everything look kind of gross. The person ends up maybe looking a little jaundice. It's because it's adding effect on top of an image that doesn't have data to work with because it's already been compressed. A raw image has all of that available data, and so you're able to warm up or cool down the image and change the tones of the image without really damaging anything in the image. It's just a much better way to shoot because you have a lot more available there. Now, raw images do take up more space, so I definitely recommend having an SD card in your camera or in your phone for that, and I've linked to an SD card that I use in my phone down below, so you can pick one of those up. And when you put that SD card in and you take your first photo, it will ask you if you want to use the SD card for photos, and then you can fill up the SD card with photos, and the memory on your phone will remain available for other things like apps and other stuff that you do. So let's enable RAW. You go into your camera settings, and then on the rear camera, you're going to want to tap on picture size, and then down at the bottom it says save RAW and JPEG images, and you're going to want to toggle that. And it does that in Pro mode only. So if you're in automatic mode, you're only getting JPEGs. You're only going to get RAW images if you're in Pro mode. And as you've noticed, every time I go into Pro mode, it gives me a reminder that I'm shooting both RAW and JPEG because it's capturing two images for me. So that's going to fill up my memory card quite a bit faster. But I've been shooting for months in RAW mode with RAW images going to the SD card. I have a 64 gigabyte SD card in my phone, and it's not even a fourth of the way full yet, so don't worry about it. It's not going to be that big of a deal. So that's going to do it for this video. I know it was a little long, but I wanted to explain these things because it takes a little bit of understanding, and I didn't get into them too deep, and some of them require some really deep explanations to understand well, which we've done over at Ditch Auto. So if you want to learn more about photography, whether it's to shoot with a smartphone or to shoot with a digital camera or a DSLR, head on over to our Ditch Auto channel and check that out because there's lots of good stuff over there for those of you interested in photography. And for State of Tech, of course, we talk about all of our technology, learning how to use our devices better, reviewing them, and all that good stuff here. So we would love a thumbs up for this video. And if you would click that subscribe button, you would get notified when we put out new videos, and we'd love to have you around for those videos when they come out. So thanks so much for checking out our channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe, and we hope to see you back here soon. Take care.